Have you ever hidden your sugar or comforted your emotions with sugar to the point of self-harm? You might be addicted. Never before in the history of mankind have we had such an emergency to lower blood sugar. If this were an infection, we'd call it a pandemic. The argument that carbs are addictive is an easy one to make. But do you really appreciate how pathologic this addiction to sugar can be? Let me show you how that looks. In the world of brains and addiction, we have lots of examples, lots of categories where the human will use a substance or a behavior that helps them calm down or relax their emotions. And when they overuse that substance or behavior, welcome to the world of addiction. It's in the wiring of our brain that these outside stimuli are consumed or behaviors are repeated to help us deal with stress, to get some dopamine and dissociate from where we're at in the moment. Dopamine is released when these feel-good substances are consumed, and indeed, we do feel better. And then we do it again. We are reward-driven creatures. Dopamine blasts into the chemistry set of our brains, and we feel good. And then we do it again and again. We use it and use it and use it and abuse it. Sadly, the addiction to carbohydrates is real. Food engineers deliver foods that deliver the highest hit of dopamine when we eat them. These engineers use foods that are high in salt, fat, carbohydrates, and abnormally small particle sizes. The design stimulates the brain to crave the next bite to a pathologic level. It actually causes you harm. We crave foods that are making us overweight, insulin resistant, and slowing our brain. It may not be our fault that we're addicted to these foods, but it is our responsibility to learn about it and prevent this from happening to the next generation. The neuroscience behind how a brain gets hardwired to crave food starts with the brain's reward center. The nucleus accumbens and hippocampus are flooded with dopamine when we eat those engineered foods with small particle sizes. And then we escalate, eating more and more carbs, feeling that feel-good sensation over and over again. And that's where addiction begins. Unfortunately, this addiction starts in early life with the amount of carbohydrates found in our primary and middle schools. And there's nothing worse than an addiction that starts in those teenage years. Their nucleus accumbens and hippocampus finish their development dependent on the dopamine they're getting from food. The next generation of carb addicts chases that dopamine surge while consuming excess amounts of these carbohydrates, stimulating their insulin production. Excess carbs lead to excess insulin. And when you flood that body with insulin, especially during the years of maturation, their brains will not reach their full potential for growth. Their bones will be denied peak growth hormone levels, not reaching their appropriate height or strength. And their endocrine system will be hijacked for years to come because of that excessive insulin. The longer they live on high carbs, the more their insulin insulates their bodies. They tuck away and store the energy and stop fueling the cells properly. Eventually, they cannot release the fat that they've stored because their insulin is so high. The longer they chase the dopamine surge with carbs, the more carbohydrates it takes to get that much dopamine. And this is where the cycle of addiction really begins. We have rule books in medicine telling us if folks are addicted. We use that rule book with opiates and alcohol and tobacco and gambling and several other pathologies known to stimulate dopamine. So let's use it with carbs. Number one, the patient uses more than they were planning. Yes, those chips where you're only going to eat a couple and now the bag is empty, you might have a problem. Number two, they've tried to cut down, but it's really difficult and then they relapse. Number three, they spend more time and resources than they planned on to get their next hit of dopamine. Number four, they have intense cravings for their drug of choice. Number five, they continue to do this behavior despite the harmful consequences. Number six, they've given up important parts of their life because of what the drug has done to them. Number seven, they have tolerance, meaning they need more of their drug to feel better. And number eight, you take it away and they withdraw. So, if you think about carbs or eating more often than you should, if you sneak out to get your carbohydrates where nobody else is looking, or you hide that candy from your kids, you might have an addiction to carbs. If you have a body mass index greater than 30, carbs have become a harmful habit. Your body needs to reduce the carbohydrates to reduce the insulin, because you will not be able to lose that weight and reverse this problem until you fix the chemistry within your body. So how do we deal with this in medicine? And no, the answer isn't give you a prescription to make it all better. Although it is very interesting that the prescription medications used in addiction medicine are also used to help with weight loss because it reduces the carb craving. We start with number 1, harm reduction. What does that mean? That means that yes, for alcoholics, we want them to drink less. For those abusing tobacco, we want them to use less. And for those of you overusing carbohydrates, we need to cut down the carbs. Maybe that means that you take your carbohydrates down to 100. In my book, I would call this dirty keto. And although it's way better than the 200 to 300 carbohydrates they were eating per day, the best reversal of this chemistry problem is yet to come. And the best way to accomplish that is to clean out those cupboards. Just like we don't let an alcoholic bring the alcohol into their house, your distance to the temptation is a predictor of who will succeed and who will relapse. So long gone are the days where you put carbohydrates in the cupboard for the grandkids. You're imprinting them. You're showing them your coping skills. So stop doing that. Show them a different way to comfort their feelings and improve their health. 20 total carbohydrates per day sounds impossible to the beginner, just like complete removal of alcohol can sound to the alcoholic. But after 6 months of staying at 20 total carbohydrates per day, you'll find their brain has relaxed, their sleep is better, their emotions are much less labile, and they've lost some weight and feel a ton better. The second most important part that I tell my addiction patients is they need to surround themselves by others working on this problem. And that's where support groups come in. Check out this video to see how I run a support group.